The Dark Secret of Weatherend by John Bellairs, Chapter 10. At 5 a.m. the next morning, Anthony awoke with a jolt. He had dared set his alarm, but fortunately he had that built-in wake-up system that some people have. The room was pitch black, and as he dressed, he felt as if he were moving inside a strange dream. In his closet was a battered leather satchel containing his tools: a hammer, a hacksaw, chisel, small crowbar, flashlight, and a Boy Scout hatchet. He had also thrown in a couple of Mounds bars and a sweatshirt. He thought about his sleeping parents and brother and the dark menace that hung over the town of Hoosac as he took the satchel out. "This isn't happening," Anthony muttered to himself. He stumbled over into a corner of the room, found his new red parka and his red leather cap, and put them on. Well, he was ready as he'd ever be. With one hand on the doorknob, Anthony looked back into his dark room. The friendly illuminated face of his bedside clock hovered there like a tiny moon. Suddenly, he had an overwhelming desire to be 5 years old, to be 5 years old and sick in bed with the flu. He wanted to be tucked in and have meals brought to him. He wanted to have his mother spoon syrups into his mouth and tell him everything was going to be all right. Luckily, the feeling passed, and he went out, closing the door softly behind him. A few minutes later, Anthony was standing on the front steps of the library waiting for Miss Eels. It was a cold, raw morning, and a stiff wind was blowing. It made a hollow, whistling sound through the trees of Levy Park. All around him, Anthony could hear the bare branches creaking and groaning, although it was still too dark to see much. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a car motor. A low, bulky shape was creeping up the circular drive in the front of the library. Anthony could hardly bear to look. What if it was Anders Borkman? But, to his great relief, he heard the signal. 3 beeps of the car horn. It was Miss Eels after all. Anthony picked up his satchel and raced toward the car. The passenger door was flung open, the dome light inside came on, and there was Miss Eels. She was quite a sight in baggy gym pants, a sweatshirt with Hoosac AC on the front, and tennis shoes. Her hair bun was slightly mussed and had 2 pencils stuck in it, and around her neck was a St. Christopher medal on a chain. On the seat next to her was a folded road map and a brown paper bag that probably contained lunch. "Hi, Anthony," she said cheerfully. She seemed amazingly calm for someone who was going off on a dangerous mission. Anthony threw his satchel into the back seat and climbed into the car. He was not terribly surprised by Miss Eels' outfit. After all, he had seen her in some pretty weird get-ups. But the medal puzzled him, and he asked about it. "Oh, that," said Miss Eels as she threw the car into gear and drove off. "St. Christopher is the patron saint of travelers. This is going to be a pretty difficult trip, and I figured we might need some help from him before this adventure is over with." The car started slowly down Levy Boulevard. Anthony was just settling himself back for the long drive when Miss Eels put on the brakes. "Look!" she said, pointing excitedly. Startled, Anthony sat up. It was still dark, but along the sidewalks he could see a row of street lamps. Someone had just passed out of the circle cast by one lamp into the gloom. Tensely, Anthony waited for the figure to move into the light again. When it suddenly did, his jaw dropped. It was Mrs. Oxenstern. She was in a gym suit, and she was walking fast, heel-toe. Her stomach bobbed up and down as she went, and she pumped her fat arms vigorously. Miss Eels covered her face with her hand. "I just don't believe it! She must come out at this ungodly hour so no one will see her. Well, now I've seen everything." And with that, Miss Eels threw the car into gear again and roared off. They drove down through the center of the sleeping city and across the great iron suspension bridge into Wisconsin. On they went through small towns and across rolling acres of farm country. As they drove, it got lighter outside, but not much lighter. It was going to be a dark day. Miss Eels switched on the car radio. The weatherman reported that it would be cloudy, clearing toward evening. But it occurred to Miss Eels and to Anthony that there might be storms that couldn't be predicted. As they drove, Miss Eels' cheerfulness gave way to worry and tension. She told Anthony that she had tried to phone Emerson several times, but had never gotten an answer. She also wondered if they might be going on a wild goose chase. The clues in old Borkman's diary might not be clues at all. "Nevertheless," said Miss Eels with a sigh, "it's better to try than not to. All last night I dreamed about those 4 standing stones, only they weren't in that circle of cedars. They were on a grassy hill with a dark mountain in the background. It was like that vision I had when the blue fog from that book put me in that terrible trance in the library. Anders Borkman was there, standing inside the circle in a black robe, and every time he flung his hands in the air, lightning bolts came crashing down from the sky, and thunder rumbled in the distance. You and Emerson and I were watching, but we couldn't do anything. And then an ice storm started, and my face was covered with ice, and I couldn't see or breathe or wake up. Gasping and choking, it was just awful. It may have been just a crazy dream, but still, well, it may have been a warning about things to come. She paused and then went on. Do you know what really drives me crazy? I feel like I ought to know the answer to that clue about the choir of the Blessed Virgin. I mean, I'm a Catholic and all, but so far it's as clear as mud. Miss Eels chatted as she drove, while Anthony just listened and watched the scenery go by. Around 10 a.m., they stopped at a restaurant in Eclair, and Anthony had a big breakfast. Miss Eels ate the sandwich and banana that she had brought. And then they drove on. The farmhouses got fewer and fewer, and the fields looked wilder and more forsaken. And then it started to snow. At first, there was just a few little twirling flakes, but soon it was coming down thick and fast. The road became a spiraling white track, and Anthony began to notice the car was wavering from side to side. I think we're starting to skid, he said, giving Miss Eels a worried glance. Miss Eels shrugged. Don't worry, friend. I had my snow... Her voice trailed off. She made a choking noise, and then she swore and pounded her fist on the steering wheel. Oh, no, I don't believe it. How could I have been such an idiotic fool? Anthony stared blankly. What's wrong? Oh, nothing much, said Miss Eels bitterly. I just forgot to have my snow chains put on, that's all. Let's hope this snow doesn't get so bad that we'll have problems. Oh, God, look! Up ahead of them, a dog had wandered out onto the road. He was directly in front of the car, just staring stupidly around him. Miss Eels hit the brakes, and the car skidded. The dog ran off, and she took her foot off the brake, but it was too late. The car began to fishtail. It swung into wider and wider arcs. Hang on, she yelled, and Anthony clutched frantically at the door handle. Rear end first, the car rolled off the road and down a steep, bumpy, rocky incline. Something hard hit the underside with a loud bong and a sickening jolt. Anthony thought they were going to flip over, but the car just kept on rolling till it came to a jarring, tooth-rattling halt against the trunk of a tree. Silence. Anthony sat dead still and listened to his pounding heart. Amazingly, he wasn't injured. For what seemed like a long time, he stared straight ahead up the steep rocky slope that was fast being covered by the swirling snow. Although he was afraid to look over and see how Miss Eels was doing, he finally forced himself, and there she sat, her hands folded on her lap, and an utterly disgusted look on her face. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? She said dryly. Then her voice broke, and it sounded as if she were going to cry. Oh, Anthony, she wailed. What are we going to do? We can't push this car up that slope or drive it up. We'll just have to sit here while the snow covers us up. And all because I forgot to put on the stupid snow chains. Don't worry, Anthony said. We'll get there somehow. Everything will be all right. Miss Eels got out of the car and went around to the rear to inspect the damage. And Anthony, with a lot of slipping and sliding, managed to scale the steep bank and make it up to the road. He waved his arms frantically at about half a dozen cars, but they all just whizzed on past. At last, a big red tow truck with a chain hoist came rolling past. When Anthony motioned, it stopped. The white letters on the truck's door said John Johnson Towing, Eclair, Wisconsin. Anthony ran up to the truck, and the driver rolled his window down. He was a middle-aged man with an oblong head, a long blunt nose, and a big sheaf of yellow hair that stuck out from under the baseball cap he was wearing. Hello, young man. What's your problem? You lost? No, said Anthony excitedly. He pointed off to the right at the ditch. Our car's down there. A dog ran in front of the car, and Miss Eels and I ran off the road. Can you get us out? The man heaved a deep sigh and looked at his watch. Oh, I suppose so, he said wearily. Anyway, I'll give it a try. He got out of the truck, mumbling some more to himself. He loped over to the edge of the road and peered down. Well, he said slowly, I think my cable will just about reach that far. Like I said, we'll give her the old college try. Tell your friend to come on up here if she can. You guys watch while I fix you up. Anthony slipped back down the slope and helped Miss Eels make it to the road. The man turned on the amber flasher on top of his truck, and then he backed it up until the rear wheels were at the very edge of the ditch. From the derrick at the rear of the truck hung a woven steel cable with a big hook on the end. With the hook in his hand and the cable paying out slowly, the man made his way down the slope toward the car. He hooked the cable under the front bumper of the Dodge, made sure the car's gears were in neutral, and then clambered back up to the truck and started the engine on the hoist. As he wandered, he sang a very monotonous song called Jan Jansen over and over in a strong Swedish accent. My name is Jan Jansen. I come from Wisconsin. I work in the lumber mill. I work in the lumber house there. When I walk down the street, the people I meet, they say to me, what is the name? What is your name? And I say, my name is Jan Jansen. I come from Wisconsin. And on and on. After the man had sung the song through about 10 times, Miss Heels and Anthony were pretty sick of it, but they were not about to complain. Mr. Johnson and his truck were, as far as they were concerned, sent from heaven. The hoisting engine whirred, and slowly the poor battered Dodge was hauled up out of the ditch. Miss Eels got her purse and some other important things out of the car. Then she and Anthony climbed into the cab with the driver, and they drove back to Eau Claire. A bit later, Anthony and Miss Eels were sitting on a couple of rickety wooden chairs in a smelly, badly lit garage. The Dodge had been lowered from the lift, and Mr. Johnson was standing before them, his long face even longer than usual. Broken axle? Asked Miss Eels, looking up. Did you say broken axle? Mr. Johnson nodded glumly. Yup, must have hit a rock or something on the way down. I can't fix it here. Have to send away to the Dodge people for a new one. My advice would be get a new car, not worth fixing in my opinion. There was an uncomfortable pause. Miss Eels looked at Anthony and down at the floor. Then she turned to Mr. Johnson, and the expression on her face was one of utter hopelessness. She thought about the chances of her being able to pay for a new car. Very soon she would be unemployed. Today was the day she was supposed to be appearing before the library board. But instead, she was off on an improbable mission that had just turned into a super impossible one. With difficulty, Miss Eels pulled herself together. She heaved a deep sigh, put on her best business-like attitude, and cleared her throat. Ahem. Well, Mr. Johnson, can we leave my poor vehicle here for a couple of days? Mr. Johnson looked hesitant. He scratched his long chin. Well, he said slowly, I got a lot of stuff out there in the back lot, but I guess one more hunk of junk wouldn't matter much. Yeah, sure, you can leave it for a bit. But how are you going to get to, did you say Duluth? We really have to get there, said Anthony. It's kind of an emergency. Yes, said Miss Eels, nodding. It really is very important. I see by the sign over there that you rent cars. Could you possibly rent us one for a few days? Mr. Johnson's eyebrows rose, and he looked Miss Eels up and down. Miss Eels blushed because she knew what he was thinking. Could an old lady who wore tennis shoes and gym pants and a Hoosac AC sweatshirt ever pay for a rented car? Silently, Miss Eels cursed herself. Why had she decided to travel in this dumb outfit when she could have just carried the gym suit along to wear later? But then her pride welled up inside her. Who did Mr. Johnson think he was, anyway? She was a respectable citizen who had lived 68 years without having been convicted of a major crime, and until recently had been regarded as a reasonably solvent, hard-working person. Slowly she stood up. She put on the most haughty expression she could manage, clutched her pocketbook to her breast, and said icily, Mr. Johnson, my credit is perfectly good. You can call the First National Bank of Hoosac if you want, and I can write you a check for the towing job you did, and then be surprised if the banks were open, said Mr. Johnson, cutting her off. Big storm down in Hoosac. Heard about it on the radio. Wind, snow, and hail to beat the band. Funny kind of storm. Just started all of a sudden down there around Hoosac and La Crosse. Usually they come in from the north and hit us first. We'll get it in an hour or so, I bet. The snow out there will be just the beginning. Mr. Johnson went back to rubbing his chin and thinking about whether or not Miss Eels was a good risk. Miss Eels and Anthony looked at each other. They were not worrying over credit ratings now. A cold fear was rising in their guts. Was this the start of the wild, world-ending storm that they had feared? Look here, Mr. Johnson, Miss Eels said angrily. I haven't got time to sit here and grow moss on my north side while you make up your mind. It is very important that we get to Duluth as soon as possible. So if you don't mind, I'll settle our towing bill, and then my young friend and I will go down The street and find her. Miss Eel's voice trailed off. She had taken one step toward the doorway of Mr. Johnson's office, but now she froze in her tracks. Anthony froze too and stared. Somebody was standing in the entrance to the garage. It was a person they knew very well, but had not expected to see. And that is the end of Chapter 10.